Hey everyone, it's Stephanie. I just wanted to come in at the top of the episode and say we are going to be talking about Gerald's Game by Stephen King, as I'm sure you saw when you downloaded this episode. We will be going through the entire plot of what happens in both the book and the movie, so there will be spoilers. Also, there are a lot of tough themes in Gerald's Game, including, but not limited to, rape, marital rape, sexual assault of a child, incest. There's definitely some gnarly body horror. We talk about it in the episode, and a lot more. So know yourself and take care of yourself. It was a great conversation with Alex Steed and Sarah Marshall of the You Are Good podcast. And Sarah Marshall, of course, does the You're Wrong About podcast, which I've been a fan of for a long time. So we will get to the conversation after this quick ad so that we can listen to the episode without interruptions. So thank you so much. See you on the other side. This episode is brought to you by Macmillan Audio. You don't want to miss this terrifying debut audiobook read by Adam Lazar White, a gothic thriller about grief and death and the depths of a father's love. Johnny Compton's The Spite House is a stunning debut by a horror master in the making. Think The Babadook meets Paul Tremblay's A Head Full of Ghosts in Texas Hill Country. This is out now from Macmillan Audio, and thank you for supporting the show. Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by guests Alex Steed and Sarah Marshall. You might know them from the You Are Good podcast, and Sarah from You Are Good and You're Wrong About. And today we are all talking about Stephen King's novel Gerald's Game, along with the 2017 Mike Flanagan adaptation. So thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm unbelievably excited to talk about this very grim pair of medias.
Yeah. It's a fascinating opportunity for us. Sarah was hinting at this earlier, but it's kind of a tradition of ours on our show where we cover movies through this feelings lens, as we say, that when we cover Stephen King, who we both love, we always cover the book as well as the movie. It's the only time that we really do page to screens, and we do that together usually because it's hard to get a guest to commit to reading a full Stephen King book and then watch the movie. It is. So this is such a, it's such a blessing to be able to do this with a third party.
Yeah. Well, I am excited. This is definitely full of feelings. I have a lot of feelings about this. About this story. So, Sarah, you said you had read it earlier. What was your first experience with this story?
I have a really vivid memory of listening to this audiobook read by Lindsay Krause, who I know best from season 4 of Buffy, apart from this, and who I think does an amazing job, and also does the audiobook of Misery, while I was driving across Colorado and Nebraska. So to me, this book is driving across Nebraska, which makes total sense because they're both about like pain and endurance. And I guess it's funny because we just did an episode doing the Dead Zone page to screen, and in that episode I was like, I think the Dead Zone is my favorite Stephen King novel, and then reading this again, listening to the Lindsay Krause audiobook again, I was like, no, I think this is definitely my favorite Stephen King novel. And I think that like What I love about Stephen King is my like pure conviction book to book that this one is really my favorite. But Gerald's Game definitely made me cry the most and almost throw up the most, and that really says something.
Yes. What about you, Alex?
This is my first experience with it. I have known since Sarah read that this was high on her list. And though I haven't, I have a bias towards, you know, Stephen King's older books, and I often have difficulty straying from that, although I just read Fairy Tale, which I liked quite a lot. But I mean, we'll talk about the horrors in this book, which are much more, the horror is in the family than the horror is supernatural. And so I think that's the thing that makes it work in a tremendous way. And then I had just realized in looking at the Flanagan movie that it came out a month before the Harvey Weinstein news broke in 2017. And I just wonder how this movie would have done had it come out 6 months later, because it's thematically speaking to a lot of what has been spoken to since that time.
Yeah. I remember the first time I heard about this book, I was working as an overnight baker. And this one girl told me she was reading this book, and I asked her what it was about. And she told me, like, yeah, it's a girl, like, her and her husband are doing something. She's chained to a bed and he dies of a heart attack. And I'm like, that's the whole book. I remember thinking that sounded not very interesting. I'm like, how do you possibly make that work for a whole novel? Then I listened to the audiobook a few months later at that same job. And I remember at the degloving scene having to like steady myself on the table because I was getting so nauseous.
I was sick for a full day. The next day, this is when I texted you about it, Sarah. The next day was walking, and at least 3 times the imagery from that scene popped into my head, and I got woozy as if I had lost blood. And that's the most, as I said to Sarah, the most unsettled by a narrative description I've been since at least I was a child.
Yeah.
What is the last other description you remember being that disturbed?
I think, strangely, it was it. I think it was the beginning of it where they're describing the state of the body in the water. And I think that was more because I could finally picture myself being dead. But in this one, I could absolutely imagine getting in a situation where I'd have to deglove.
Totally. I do not tend to have a weak stomach around horror movies. That's like changed a bit as I've gotten older, but like Gerald's Game, the movie, is the first thing ever in a movie that has ever made me like truly almost barf. And it's a testament to what sound design can do for your horror movie as well, I think.
Oh my God. That, the scene, I know Shudder just recently did like 101 scariest movie moments, and that was on the list. Just they played it again, and this time I don't think I even watched it. I had to like look away. I'm like, I can't watch this again. I just read this. I know what happens.
And it just slides off. It's oh my God. And the progression that gets there, because it obviously the Gerald's attempted rape is by no means funny. The tone of when Prince arrives and starts meddling with the body is I found it kind of funny. And then I think like starting with like a little bit of humor makes the progression to almost full degloving even better.
I think it's funny in a very main sort of way, where it's like, you hear about the guy up the road had a heart attack trying to force himself on his wife. She had to deglove her own hand, slipping out of the cuffs.
Yeah, it's exactly.
Drove herself to safety and only found out later there'd been a serial killer there the whole time.
That's how we survived.
If you want more of my main accent, please send $2.99 to PO Box 107, Portland, Oregon.
In a seat.
Yeah, we have to have that as a background character in an upcoming King novel. Just like
it's better than most audiobook stabs at the main accent.
Yeah.
I think that I have listened to so many Stephen King audiobooks that I feel like I have kind of a basis for comparison, and I would love to hear what you both think, but I remember thinking that Michael C. Hall and Fred Gwynne both did really good jobs. Was it? No, it wasn't Fred Gwynne, because he was the actor in the movie Pet Sematary. It was Edward Herman, who also, I think, he wrote
Yeah,
the
I think Edward
Knockers.
Herman did the best.
And James Franco didn't even fucking try.
Which one did Edward Herman narrate?
The Tommy Knockers.
Oh.
It's great. It's so long.
Did you listen to Dolores Claiborne?
I have never read Dolores Claiborne, and only reading this now the second time did I realize through looking it up that like there's a Dolores Claiborne connection. It's kind of the only supernatural thing in this book, I feel like, actually, is the sort of psychic connection to Dolores Claiborne. And I'm like, well, now that I know Gerald's Game has a sassy sister novel.
Oh, it is sassy, too.
I know it's fucked up, and I know the movie is fucked up, and it'll ruin David Strathairn for me. Is that who's in that?
I think so.
I think also Dolores Claiborne is the King text that gets requested the most of our show.
Really? Yeah, that makes sense.
Interesting.
As like a movie in particular.
Because it's so knowable, and it's also totally unsupernatural, right? Or maybe except for a few tiny little
Except
licks.
for the eclipse part of it. But yeah, well, the audiobook, it's just one long monologue, and it's written in a main accent. So it's the whole audiobook is her speaking that way and saying like, sit down, I got a story to tell you.
That is some high concept fucking Spoon River anthology literary shit right there. And I will go to my grave angry that Stephen King, who sucks in many ways, very anti-fat, very misogynistic at times, writes very racist shit, especially early in his career. I could go on. However, I don't think he's ever been fully recognized for like the literary guy that he is.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot just in this book. Like, I highlighted so much of it.
Yeah, like what stood out to you this time? Is this your second time?
This is my second time reading it. I think there was just a lot of quotes that I highlighted, but I think also the good wife voice this time. I think the first time I listened to it, I think I had a bit of disdain for the good wife voice, and I kind of just wanted her to shut up. And I mean, to make it personal, I grew up like in Christian fundamentalism, like the Duggars, like women don't wear pants and drums are evil.
Oh wow, drum. There's so many drums in the Bible though.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. I know, you would think.
Least of their concerns, really. But...
Truly. But I think this time noticing that the good wife voice does help her survive, and she survives by realizing that that is also a part of her, and it's a part of her that's been passed down, you know, with how to survive in a patriarchy.
Totally. Yeah. And
I was just going to say, each of these voices has a purpose, and I think as they're presented at the beginning, it feels like some may have more weighted value than the others, but you know, she's able to distill that purpose over time, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, would you be okay telling our listeners what Gerald's Game is about, roughly?
Oh my goodness, yes. So Gerald's Game is about it was a novel that came out in what, 1990, 91, 92?
I think
somewhere
91.
In there. 91. About a woman named Jessie Mayhoot Burlingame and her husband Gerald Burlingame, who at this point like can only sustain an erection when he puts her in handcuffs. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to the lake house in October. So no one else is at their lake house nearby. Oh well, I'm sure it'll be fine. And they go to the lake house. She decides, actually, no, I don't want to do this. Please let me out. And he's like, I'm choosing to ignore that. We're proceeding. And so as he's attempting to rape her, and she's kind of already in this internal monologue, because Stephen King books are all so incredibly verbal, that we're like deep into internal monologue in the book in what is like 3 minutes of movie time. She's thinking like she could, if he goes through with this and she can't fight him off. Like, no one would ever care. No one would believe her. And so she tries to kick him away and he has a heart attack and dies. And really the rest of the book is her attempting to figure out how to save her own life. And in the book, she does so with inner voices that are the good wife character, who's sort of her repressed good wife side, the voice of her college roommate, Ruth, who's like the tough kind of survivalist side of her and the face the truth side of her, and ultimately the child within her, literally her inner child. This book is like Stephen King goes to therapy, or at least his wife goes to therapy and tells him all about it.
Yeah, it's good wife, child, and second wave feminist.
Yes, totally. The three faces of Eve. And it's so funny to me, and it makes sense that in the movie, instead of that, we get the inner voices represented by actors portraying them are like inner, like sort of inner adult Jesse, inner child Jesse, and Gerald. Yeah. I assume partly just because Bruce Greenwood wanted more screen time, to which I say, why not be in a movie for 6 minutes and then get second billing, you idiot?
I love that mechanism a lot, actually. I think it would have been very
Gerald
difficult. Yeah. And her seeing herself how Gerald sees her and realizing that, like, I like that a lot. Like, and also just, I can't imagine how they would have given us the backstory of who these other people were.
Yeah. I mean, like 3 or 4 Carla Guginos in the same frame is like, honestly, a bit much.
I'm into it as someone who, as I told you, Sarah, as someone who loved the Pauly Shore classic son-in-law.
I had no idea she was a son-in-law. I'm running out and watching it immediately. I did just watch Snake Eyes, which she's kind of one of the only good things about, aside from
seen that one.
The camera. It is a Nicolas Cage movie with an assassin. It's very Brian De Palma. It's like if Brian De Palma made an 80s movie in the 90s.
Don't we get Caruso's buns in that? We get buns.
There's no buns that I can recall. So, hesitant thumbs up on Snake Eyes. But yeah, and to speak to like Gerald representing that voice, 2 things I think about that in brief are movies need different things than books dramatically. And B, I do think that has the effect of showing like the representation of like the overt repression of like being a woman in a man's world and in a world where men abuse women and girls, versus like the internalized oppressiveness of these other characters that she's talking to and voices in her head to some extent, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, great point.
And so she also, the first night comes and she thinks she sees a big scary man in the corner. But she's like, surely that there's not really a big scary man in the corner. A stray dog comes in and starts eating her dead husband. And she gradually has to recover her actual will to survive by connecting with herself as a child before her father molested her, which is also a memory that she has to confront and go back to, which she's been avoiding doing for her entire life, for 29 years. And through doing that, and I think the thing I remember finding most moving when I first listened to this is like recovering the will to live by like setting herself internally free from like these stocks of shame that she's been keeping her younger self in this entire time for the crime of what she believes to have been, tempting her father into abusing her, which is also very, very the novel. And so by another difference between the movie and the book that I love is that in the book, she realizes through like thinking through this memory and being reassured by one of her kind of inner voices that she has the tools she needs to survive are in there. She remembers that she and her father were looking at this total eclipse, which this abuse incident happened during, like through just like panes of glass that he'd cut out of a storm window. And because of the timing of when this movie was made, they set this scene not in the early 60s, but in the late 80s. And clearly were like, obviously no parents in the 80s would let their little children handle just like panes of glass with like broken edges. So they have Jessie like grab a glass at dinner because she's freaking out after the event and like cut her hand that way. But in both cases, she's able to remember that like blood is very slick, and if she is able to like smash a glass and cut her hand and her wrist, like maybe she can like get enough blood to lubricate her hand and squeeze out. And that doesn't quite work. But what does happen is that she's cut her hand up so much that it just kind of works out that she is able to deglove her own hand by yanking her hand through the handcuff. And it's the grossest thing I've ever read. And I love that scene so much. It's one of the great scenes. Before there was Saw, there was Gerald's Game. And I love the way Carla Gugino acts it. I think it's like the kind of role Clint Eastwood normally has. It's like, I don't know, something very Western about it all. And then she escapes. And then, as Alex pointed out, in a very and she escapes like very slowly, I might add, because then it's like, you're almost bleeding to death. You've been lying here for 2 days. Like, it's going to be real tough to get to safety. But for the sake of brevity, I'll say that she does. And that, like, the action really continues. And then, as Alex pointed out in a very enthusiastic text message, we get a bonus serial killer. Stephen King comes out in his robe like Ferris Bueller and is like, but wait, I have a serial killer for you. And then we get, in the movie, Jessie writing a letter to her younger self, and in the book, her writing a letter to Ruth, her college friend, who's kind of like internalized voice, helped her through this, and telling her all about how there was this like acromegaly suffering, giant, grave robbing, incredibly prolific, gross serial killer who is in the room with her as well. And I love that.
Who's like a superhero version of Ed Gein, basically.
Yes. She's like, what if Ed Gein was like a New Englander who put in his hours? What about that? Also, this movie was filmed in Alabama, the Maine of the South, as I'm sure no one has ever said. Although it does have fishing.
They do bring up Louisiana, and there are a lot of Louisiana-Maine connections.
Oh, really? Why is that?
The Acadians.
Who
went down to become Cajuns.
Okay, perfect sense. Yeah, it's adjacency to French speakers that makes it work.
The serial killer's name makes total sense in that setting. Oh yeah, like it's the only setting it would make sense.
Love it. Okay. And I just want it to not escape mention that, Alex, you pointed out that Amato's in Gorham, Maine is mentioned several times. For a while, it looks like Jessie's last meal is going to be a salami sub from Amato's. What is Amato's, and what is its significance to you?
Amato's is it's complicated. It's not complicated. It's just like a sandwich shop run by Italians that sell what is known in New England as an Italian, which is a grinder sandwich.
Which is an Italian child. Thank you.
Which is, and the reason why it's so there's several notes I want to hit here. They have maybe 20-ish locations in Maine. There's probably more, and I don't have it right, but like you can, in any town with a substantial population, you can go to an Amato's. Their version of an Italian is boiled ham, and that was very controversial for my father, who moved up from the Boston area, but you can also get an original Italian, which is an actual Italian, which is a very funny
sandwich opinions. Like people, has anyone ever been murdered over sandwich opinions?
Yes, I'm positive. And then anyone in northern New England who goes back far enough will claim that someone in their family actually created the Italian. And then my last bit of Amato's trivia is this. Amato's, where she goes, is where I met Stephen King once, because I went in and he was ordering a sandwich. And it was so funny, like they were like, Steve? And no one, and like, I was like, is anyone gonna notice that this is Stephen King? And so I got an opportunity.
He looks like everyone else there. Why would they notice?
I wrote for the Bangor paper at the time, so I felt emboldened to go up and talk to him. And I said a nice thing about The Shining and how much it meant to me and how it saved my life in a lot of ways because it changed my relationship with drinking. And he said same for him. And then he went out of his way to come and say goodbye before he left the shop. Very sweet man.
That's so nice.
Yeah. But he clearly loves the gore of Amados, which comes up a lot.
I feel like there's a subtext of like, if I have to die chained to a bed, at least my last meal was a grinder from. Or, do people say grinder in Maine? This also, I'm sure, is very contentious.
They don't, but it is a grinder. Yeah, it is. It is effectively a grinder, but it's in Italian.
There you go.
It's like
my last meal was a long sandwich from Amados.
In Albany, it's like a speedy. Everyone has a different,
Interesting.
It's insane. The words people have for hot dogs, I just don't even. The English language is magic.
You mean red snappers?
I mean rippers and glizzies.
I just learned about glizzies recently.
What the fuck are glizzies? I feel like this is a social media thing somehow.
I think it is because my son said it. And I was like, where's this coming from?
Right? Is your child talking about glizzies? What are they watching on TikTok? What does it mean?
Here's some warning signs to look out for.
Exactly. Well, back to Gerald's game, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I have conflicted feelings about the addition of the whole serial killer plotline, but I get it in the book in that this is her finally asserting herself and saying, like, I saw this, and her being not believed and then being right about it and her having this triumph over this thing. But I'm always like, but why? And if it was imagined, it wouldn't have that impact. And it's just another thing where she's a woman and she's written off.
I think to that point. Oh, go for it, Sarah.
I also feel like Stephen King we just came off of doing a Dead Zone episode, and like a couple of things that stick out to me are that like there's a cautionary tale in Stephen King books about being a pretty young redheaded school teacher who marries a Republican lawyer. Don't marry the Republican lawyer. Marry the rangy alcoholic who loves literature, apparently. And also that Stephen King, I think, kind of throws serial killers into his books sometimes as if they're MSG, which maybe is not always thematically supported, but I always enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, he has like a penis necklace.
Yes,
he sure does.
I think that there's a lot of issues with. So to that point, like to the point of what the serial killer function is in the book. Everything that you just said, for sure, Stephanie, but then also I like that it gives us the opportunity that like the very best man in her life still is bad.
Yes.
the guy who's helping her out is still just like, oh, I like him, he's fine, but like he's not letting me do the thing that I ultimately need to do, and I'm going to go and do the thing. And I like that it serves that. But making him like a ultimately handicapped gay serial killer, I feel like was maybe a lot. And also the thing that I loved about the Dead Zone that came up in our conversation is like it's a very ACAB book. Like it's very in this book, there's like a lot of like. Cops are humans. Like, we got to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're trying to do the best thing. There's like a lot more of that than I expected. Yeah. I don't know what's going on.
He's like, walk it back, Steve. You're 45. Yeah.
I don't know what's going on back in Steve's late 80s, early 90s. But yeah.
I mean, as like a privileged white woman, Jessie is going to have the best outcome when it comes to police and having a notable husband. Like, they all work together to tell the media a certain story.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Totally. Yeah, it's like when you go to Amato's and you're like, can I have a grinder, please? And then they put just like a little bit of broken glass in it. And you're like, hey, there's broken glass in my sandwich. And they're like, yeah, but you have no idea how much glass we're putting in other people's sandwiches. Some of them, they're just all glass. And they bring it back and they're like, this is glass. And we're like, no, it isn't. It's a sandwich. It's a grinder. It's a sub.
Steve.
Steve? Steve? Is anybody here Steve?
So what's the best way to eat this grinder?
with a human tongue in it.
Oh yeah.
I love that detail. It's wild.
You gotta dice it. I mean, if it's become leathery,
You gotta dice your tongue. You know what you gotta do? You gotta do a brine. You gotta brine that tongue.
Totally. You gotta brine it, you gotta soak it.
And then low and slow.
Chop it up.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe
it's a
make
muscle.
What about do it like chopped liver? You know, chopped tongue on toast.
You'd really have to.
Little bit of like duck fat.
Because he got that from that wasn't like a fresh tongue, right? Like that was like from.
He's not getting anything fresh. How did did we establish at any point what siren song brought him to Gerald? He just wanders into open doors.
Well, to the point where this story is maybe draws from reality is in 2013, a man who was a legend in Maine, legend by the name of the North Pond Hermit, was arrested. And the North Pond Hermit broke into hundreds of homes and didn't take tongues or wear penis jewelry, but the North Pond Hermit did just take stuff from people's houses, and not consequential things necessarily. Like he'd take like a picture in a frame, maybe like take change and stuff that was there, but he was a guy who just like withdrew, went out into the woods, and would break into people's homes. And like when they found him, they found that very similar to the killer in this book. They found just like boxes and boxes of people's stuff, and it was known in this area in Maine that like there's a chance someone's going to come into your house and take some of your
Perfect
stuff.
sense. I love it's the perfect crime. You're like, kids, take the loose change from the bowl for the ATM, for the vending machine after your swimming lesson. And then it's gone. He's struck again.
And he was operating, by the time he got arrested, he was operating for over 30 years. So like there could be I don't know.
Totally. I buy it.
Yeah. Well, and this whole area was supposed to be empty because it was people's summer homes, right?
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
That's why no one would be able to hear her.
Yes.
In Maine, no one can hear you scream.
Certainly can.
That's what it says when you drive into the state.
Okay.
It used to say Maine when we had this like fascist governor called Paul LePage. He changed the sign to say "Welcome to Maine, open for business," which might as well say "No one can hear you scream."
If I were that nationalist, I would change my name to Paul the Page.
Freedom, Paul.
I will say in the book, I did enjoy the Ruth we got as a character, even the like bit that we learned about her as a college roommate and how much she was there for her. First of all, she seemed fun as hell. She seemed to have such a fun energy, but just that she was the last person or the only person that she ever almost opened up to, and then decided last minute to shut that door and cut her out of her life, essentially.
Yeah, and you saying that makes it occur to me that like it's meaningful to me that her arc is like back toward like intimacy with a female friend, and like continuing with this like this book has forgotten that ACAB, but it knows that AMAB, all men. So I love that, you know, and that like it is like so comparatively rare to have some sort of self-actualization plot for a female character without a love plot even implicitly inside of it. And like I think that's because sort of the realization of love is considered to be like an essential element of self-actualization for women. But I think becoming capable of receiving love is. And also like we like love stories and they make a lot of money, so it makes sense to do that a lot. But I don't know. I guess like I love stories about people stuck in something. I love kind of survival stories. I especially love stories about women in survival situations, and they're comparatively rare. And like, to me, that arc for her and that kind of like faith in her as like a solo character means a lot to me.
Yeah. I pictured in the Ruth character, I alternated between three visions of what she looked like, and one was Janine Garofalo.
I love that.
Totally.
One was Fran Lebowitz.
Mm-hmm.
And then one was Jackie Hoffman, the character actress who looks like Fran Lebowitz.
There you go. What if this movie was the same, but Janine Garofalo was there?
Fantastic.
Like, she just shows up to
Yeah.
start talking. There's no introduction. We don't say who Ruth is.
Yeah.
She just shows up and starts talking.
You're like, is that Janine Garofalo? It's like when I went to see the menu and I spent 2 hours thinking, is that Judith Light?
Yeah, yes, so great. The thing, and what I enjoy about the Ruth character, and I'm curious about both of your thoughts on this, is, you know, again, it's like very, because of the time, I mean, and because of which waves we were in, it's very much a second wave feminist character, and I think a defining element of the second wave in retrospect was a lack of nuance sometimes when it was important when talking with your friend who may have been molested by their father. And
Just spit it out, girly. Just say it. That's how you talk to people.
And I understand also that, like, it's not Ruth that's talking to her, it's her talking to herself in Ruth's persona. But it was an interesting journey learning the reasons why she kept this inside beyond just the trauma of the situation, and like what was going on around her socially as well. And the fear, and this comes up on our show all the time, is like the fear and caginess that comes with getting to see, being seen by someone who can actually see you, and then being like, I gotta get out of here because this person's gonna see me and I'm gonna have to deal with it.
Because it fucking sucks. And then you're like, no, I'm gonna feel something so horrible that then I'll die. Yes. And I really appreciate that this book contains a therapist being like, the feeling won't kill you. Because I have to be told that daily. I'm convinced there are feelings that'll kill me.
And then she's like, cool, I'm out.
Yeah, don't worry about scheduling another appointment. Bye. Yeah.
Also, the reveal in the book where she finally, this is so perfect, where she finally, after the ordeal, realizes she needs to re-pursue therapy, and she gets in touch with her therapist who has died, and then she's like, well, that's all the therapy. Very confusing view.
He'll get some tapes.
She'll get some Dianetics tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very hesitant view of therapy.
Truly. I think that might, I don't know, I was going to say might be a generational thing, because I noticed that rewatching Gilmore Girls, I'm like, Amy Sherman Palladino, it's not like therapy.
I mean, I am just coming up on my year anniversary for being in therapy, and I feel like growing up watching movies, you know, that were made in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that kind of thing was presented as a joke, you know, like a Woody Allen character being like, I've been in analysis for 15 years. And it's like, oh, when are you going to be better? And I feel like it's now like very culturally accepted, at least for younger adults. Like, no, you just kind of, people just need therapy. It's like, you need to take your car in. Don't you think that you should be taking your car in?
Yeah, like prior we have Alan Seaver from Growing Pains as the therapist.
Yeah.
We have Billy Crystal in Analyze This.
Bob Newhart.
Bob Newhart as it wasn't like a very competent, yeah, totally. Frasier, who needed a therapist more than all. It wasn't a very competent view in pop culture. The stepdad from the Santa Claus. It was a very
I love Neil.
Neil's the best, but we have to admit that like the template for therapists in pop culture based on these examples is like effete male cucks.
Soy boys.
And also, like, for that reason, Jason Seaver was always my dream dad. I love how he was always like, he ran his home like a European UN, you know, where he was like, Ben, there are bylaws in the Seaver household, and you've just broken 2B. You know, there was like a very clear sense of expectations and consequences among the Seavers.
Oh, yes, there sure were. But yes, you could tell Steve had a conflicted relationship with therapy around 1989,
well, I feel like he's like, therapy's probably good, but you know what else works is degloving your own hand.
You can do it a week at a time, Steve. You can try.
It's kind of like Est. You just like take a weekend and you just really get into it.
Oh my god. What stands out for you both as far as what the changes from the movie to the book that you felt maybe worked or didn't work?
So in the book, I will say the build up and the scene with the father, because we get so much build up to it. We get so much of like hinting back to it. And this time I felt my stomach lurch as it got closer and closer to what was happening. And there's so much more premeditation in the book where he tells her to wear the dress. And you know, he kind of arranges for everyone to go away and arranges it so that Jesse knows that he did this. And then, I mean, in the book and movie, it also talks about like the worst thing that he did was how he manipulated her after that into having her think that it's somehow her fault as well. And the best thing is to never tell anyone because it's going to keep her out of trouble.
Yeah, and the illustration of him just, and by the way, everybody, trigger warning, it's Elliot from E.T. Like, that's the hardest. The hard, just like that sweet boy, here we are. But the, what I think that the illustration of that scene in particular, illustration of that character, the character of her father in particular, just seeing this person who I don't think is consciously being manipulative, is just manipulative all the time. Like, is just like, because like in the book, like when he arranges, again to your point, like arranges for them being in separate places, like this is a person like who I feel like, I'm not saying this doesn't excuse them not doing it consciously, but this seems like a person who like their only mode of operation is manipulation to everybody, and which to me just makes it even more terrifying. Like it makes him like even more frightening. And yeah, I was similarly looking beyond the screen when I knew it was coming up, because I was like, oh, this is big.
It's just a nice scene to go like make a cup of tea.
Good point.
Elliot from E.T. does get redempted in other Mike Flanagan works, because I know he likes to use kind of his like same group of actors. So he's had other better roles. Yeah. So
what else is he in? Oh,
the Haunting of Hill House. He plays like the young Hugh Crane, like when the kids are young.
Oh, this is the second time that has come up in a week. I have to watch that at some point.
We liked it. What about for you, Sarah?
Let's see. I mean, I think the change in time period is interesting because we go from a section of the book set in 1963 to one set in 1989 in the movie, and to me it doesn't play that different because it's funny to think also that Jesse's mother in the movie is adult Jesse's age in the book, and like it's happening in the same time period as the book, and it doesn't feel to me, and like because the family dynamics that are happening in 1963 don't feel at all implausible to me to still be happening in 1989 or now that I think about it. I don't know, and I just find that thought-provoking, and I also think it's interesting. I always find it interesting when directors make a choice to like time progress Stephen King stories, and I assume that there's like some kind of studio calculus being done about like the relatability factor and how like we want to see children in the 80s but adults in the now tees. And so it's interesting to me that like they didn't kind of go with the time period in which this was written, and like just what would that be like to have it be sort of like of another time. But I think really it's like for childhood stories that we most want that like the 80s treatment that we would give this, and like to do it for adults just would make it seem unrelatable.
Well, it's interesting here because like usually that decision is made as pragmatically as it is philosophically, and it's just like what, like if you can not make two period, if you cannot sort of give yourself the obstacle of dealing with like two period pieces, like they did this with It, like the redo of It. We went back to the 80s, but then we are now. You want to not do that, but like it wouldn't be an obstacle in this movie because are now is entirely in this house. Like you could
Right.
just like, it's basically like minor set decoration, and then your then in the 60s would just require getting an older car basically and a different
Yeah.
radio.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, I wonder how much of that decision was made for like relatability's sake, and most of your audience is going to be, you know, X or elder millennial.
Do you think they would have kept all the slang, like people getting goosed?
I would love it if they did. I love that they like had Sam Cooke as like the triggering song in this, because it would have just felt weird if it was like, I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany or something.
Yeah, that would have.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad they went with Daddy's old music, as he calls it.
I mean, I feel like
Ugh,
ultimately there's like a timeless creepiness to all of this, and like, I don't know, I mean, there's really like the thing that most connects it to period, I feel like, is the like second wave feminist quality of Jessie being in college, which makes sense because when Stephen King writes characters in college, they're always doing like 60s stuff, because that's when he was in college.
And it makes me wonder like what he's drawing from too. From like who is he drawing from for Ruth in his life? I'm curious to know.
Oh wow, yeah.
Like was it like just like, I've heard this is how they talk, or did he have some personal experience?
I feel like it was someone he knew in academia for like a semester.
That makes sense, yeah.
I hope she also still sends like dirty greeting cards for fun.
Yeah. That's how Hallmark should try and get people to write cards again. Be like, hey, you can make them dirty. Based
on everything we've learned from the past like 5 years, there is a 1 in 2 chance that Ruth became QAnon. Like I feel like everyone who like was like a real sort of like movement type grew up and either went further into it or became QAnon.
It's true, because in the present, like the last that she heard of her, she was like in a lesbian commune, right?
Yeah, oh god.
She was at the Rubber Rose Ranch, and even cowgirls get the blues, hopefully.
Ideally.
What was I going to say? Oh, but going back to, I guess, a little bit of the Ruth character, I think Stephen King also nailed the importance of hearing other women's experiences, because it's when she's in that woman's group, that's really what sets it off, is she hears someone else telling her story and she finishes the sentence for her, like under her breath. When they're saying like, why didn't you tell your mom? And she says under her breath, because it would have killed her. And that's when Ruth is like, what'd you say? What was that?
There's also, I mean, to me, the main difference between the book and the movie that I always think of is just like, I love this movie, but I feel like there's naturally so much you're able to do just with the like in this movie we have a character talking to herself, and in this book we have a character talking to herself for like many tens of thousands of words, and it just has a different effect. And I feel like Stephen King books, and again also having just read The Dead Zone again, this sticks out to me, like I think these books are compelling partly because they're characters who have like internal monologues and who are able to like, who talk to themselves all day long. And there's something to me about that, to me makes the book ultimately the thing I love most, given the choice between the two, because it's like, it's just, you spend an entire novel in a woman's head. And I think it's important, you know, to prove that there's, you know, that this is like some of the greatest drama I've experienced as a reader, is her trying to get this glass of water.
It's true. I remember thinking like, this happened so fast in the movie. Like she figures out rolling the tag right away. And I'm like, oh, this took a long time in the book. Like, I feel like getting the glass was an ordeal.
And we got to hear about Newsweek for a while, which I also
love. I'll say they softened up a lot of the characters. I feel like in the book, she has nothing but disgust for Gerald in the way that she views him. And I don't think that comes across in the movie, or at least we're not led to believe that that's their relationship.
They're at like a natural end of a marriage, and not at a like Gerald in the book is sadistic. Like
Yes.
he certainly absolutely crosses lines here and reveals that he has a rape fantasy, and pushes that. But then the Gerald that we get, the thing that spoke to me, that I don't know how it would be to convey it in a movie, but his smile was such a significant piece, and like his smile being a form of condescension, and like her coming to realize that the smile is a form of condescension, which I feel like is an extremely relatable character trait of someone who's in your life and controlling. And I thought that those descriptions were tremendous. So we do get a lot of Stephen King's fat phobia in Gerald, I would say. And so I'm glad we avoided that in the movie. But to the point that we were all talking about earlier, Gerald's almost too not attractive in a conventional way, though he is conventionally attractive. I was like, how is a man who is this much older than me keeping it together like that?
Body with a body, Bruce.
Body with
Bruce Greenwood. Bruce Greenwood.
He's also more charismatic than Gerald comes across in the book.
I feel like Gerald is written a lot like Harold Lauder in The Stand, where he's Stephen King's kind of like shadow self depiction of like the like virginal, sad, fat boy nerd who grew up and was given more power than he deserved and then like wielded it abusively. And that's a good thing to fear. So aside from the part where he's fat, but the power thing is good.
Yeah. I mean, part of me wonders, and if in Stephen King's brain, he is fat phobic, but if that was his way of explaining away a heart attack, like why that would be so easily triggered by a kick.
Yeah.
Oh, just have him be a heavy smoker.
Yeah,
there you go.
That's true.
Or just people have heart attacks for some reason, or like maybe he did a lot of cocaine in his law school days that we never,
I mean, I guess, he's a lawyer in the 90s, so.
They call that booger sugar in Maine.
Oh my God. See, that's just bad marketing. Again, I brought this up earlier. I am curious to know how this would have done better or worse if it came out 6 months later, because just like the end of the movie in particular that wraps up that the father's power was in keeping her silent, and Gerald's power was in keeping her comfortable, and then she, to your point, Stephanie, like about talking and sharing stories, she talks about how she tells her story every day in conjunction with this group that she started in order to get other people to tell, and other women in particular, based on the one example we've seen, to tell their story. There's so much going on in this movie that obviously, in the adaptation in particular, that is obviously going on all the time. It's not to say that it's not going on all the time, but that would become such a gigantic piece of national conversation the month after the movie came out. And I imagine like many Netflix movies just fell flat. I mean, it's a great movie. Out the same months as like 75 other things.
Right.
And I remember
exactly.
when this movie came out, I was like reviewing movies and TV at the time, and it occurred to me to review it. But the moment to review it came and went in like
Very
5 days.
Yeah. And Flanagan, to your point, and I have not seen The Haunting of Hill House yet, but I just received an extremely enthusiastic recommendation by our friend Eve to check that out. But he goes on to make Dr. Sleep. Is that after this or before this?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think maybe it was 2019.
Yeah, so after.
Yeah.
And I do love, at least in these two movies, I was saying to Sarah, there's something about like the richness of the sort of visuals in the scenes that you can very much tell they're made by the same filmmaker. It's a gorgeously shot movie.
He's a great filmmaker, and also like a big King fan. Like he had said this was a dream of his since he was a teenager, and he read the book, and everyone had said this was an unfilmable movie. Like, how could you possibly translate this?
They said that about Portrait of a Lady as well. Seriously.
And to the point of him very clearly being a King fan is all of the pieces of dialogue feel like they were written by King, even pieces that didn't come straight from the book. Like it feels like it's in King cadence.
And all the little verbal homages to Stephen King too, because there's like reference to like taking our medicine.
Yes,
we know from The Shining, book not movie.
Gerald says all things serve the beam, just like Dark Tower.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. This is written by a fan and not someone who was tasked with doing this.
Yeah, who saw like an easy, well, not easy, but a cheaper movie.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like there's something great about like the kind of what is offered by the Stephen King cinematic literary universe, because like, you know, this book, like many others, like situates it alongside other Stephen King novels, and it is like, to me, it's why bother going to a galaxy far, far away in Star Wars when you can just go to Maine?
Or go home.
Or go home. Or go to Bangor.
Yeah, I like that is a I was obviously reading reviews in particular of the audiobook because I also took this in through my ears, and I was reading the reviews on the app, and I was kind of surprised by like people's beef with this book were I feel like it must have been mostly male, because they were like, not scary, least scary book, etc., etc. And I was like,
fuck you.
Yeah, a girl gets molested for like 300 pages. Like, it's like, are you fucking serious? Like, I found this to be the most unsettling and convincing, outside of the degloving, which is the most obvious visceral horror. It's like getting to spend, just spending all of that time with her young, and then getting to spend time with her being manipulated in the way that she is, and getting to spend all of this time in her head. I found it to be the most, I think maybe the most unsettling of his books that I've come across, because, you know, Sarah always says with regard to horror that like she's lost when it's demons, like when it's demons, it takes her out of the reality. And, you know, this gets like maybe a touch close with Superhuman Ed Gein, but the fact that the horror is in her house on 2 occasions with 2 different men was very real.
3 different men, really, if you count Gerald. And
I'm sorry, he is who I was counting.
Oh, okay,
Gerald,
and then in that house, and then her dad in the other house.
Yes. I forgot about Bonus Man
at Dark Score Lake.
Yes. What's his name? Space Cowboy. I forgot about Space
Cowboy. Yeah.
And he is very scary in the movie. Like, I had forgotten just like him lurking in the corner, the visual of that. I was like, oh my gosh.
I love when he recognizes her in the courtroom, and he's just like a sweet. Well, I mean, he's not sweet because he's like whatever.
He's like Wheezy, like, right behind you there.
Yeah, he's just like a big, lumbering. Like, I'm not entirely sure what I'm up to. I believe that actor, I could be wrong, has been in Rob Zombie movies, but I might be conflating him with another Rob Zombie character.
I think he's like Lurch from the Addams Family.
Oh, movies. Yes, it is Lurch from the Addams Family.
Yeah, but her having her moment of confronting him.
And as I said, texted to Sarah when that comes up in the courtroom. In the book, I think she spits on him. In the courtroom.
He toned it down a bit.
Yeah, it's exactly the Nancy Thompson end of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
It's exact where she essentially says, what does she say in Nightmare on Elm Street, Sarah?
I take back every bit of energy I ever gave you, Freddie. You're nothing. You're shit.
Beautiful. And in here, she says, you're a lot smaller than I remember.
Right?
It's great.
Someone writing a review of this talking about how not scary it is like even scarier than this is. And, you know, like a leitmotif in my work is how like serial killers and stuff, like men who like really commit the most outlandishly intense sort of sins that men can, especially against women, are very scary. And yet the ones passing as normal are sometimes scarier because you're like, you're not locked up. You just say shit like that and nothing happens to you. And I mean, you know, this book is like, the Bev Marsh parts of it without that fun, you know, clown that helped to lighten the tension between her and her dad.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is a lot of that.
Yeah, I don't, just like, I mean, if someone who, I don't know, ideally people know from everything we've talked about that, like, this book is like 50% trigger warning.
I mean, it's 50% trigger warning for sexual abuse, and it's 25% trigger warning for, like, gross physical, like, body stuff. And then the other 25% is pop song references, I guess.
You know what? You know the
Fat
thing,
phobia, transphobia.
Yeah,
Yes,
that too, of course.
the thing that gets me
Ableism.
about the degloving, I'm just now realizing this. I've been processing this in the back of my head the whole time. Is like Saw, to your point, Sarah, is it's needing to get out of a situation that you can imagine yourself being in, versus in so much of the gore or horror that happens in Stephen King books is like a thing that's happening to a person, not a thing that person has to do to themselves in order to get out.
Totally.
And you know, a lot of the themes that you're talking about, you're wrong about, which is just sort of like the horrors of survival, big and every day.
So surviving, it's the survival shopping and pop music hour lately. Yeah.
It reminds of that, is that it's like survive, you know, whether you're degloving, whether you're
slicing or dicing.
Whether you're slicing or dicing, or trying to work through shit that has come up in the past that's like getting you in the same life trap over and over or whatever. It is all haunting and extraordinarily difficult.
Yes. And I'll say this book has been very, you know, important in my deconstruction journey, you know, in my, I don't want to speak for all Christianity, but, you know, it does discourage a lot of self-reflection. They like to say, like, you can't trust yourself. They'll quote, like, the heart is desperately wicked above all things and deceitful. Who can know it? Like, lean not on your own understanding.
My least favorite Asia Argento film. Sorry. That's so infuriating to me, though.
It is extremely infuriating. And I know it's the trope in like all fantasy movies that it's like the answer was in you all along, is very inspiring. And I don't know, there's a lot to love with this story.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I think kind of the story is an antidote to the kind of the gaslighting that you commit against yourself in your struggle to kind of carve out a life for yourself in an oppressive world, or one where you have learned to be dead to your feelings for survival. I mean, yeah, it never occurred to me to think that this would be like a book that would also like resonate with people kind of coming out of a repressive religious upbringing, but it makes total sense to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially that good wife character that I kind of always associated with my time there. And I was like, I just hate her. She just needs to go away. And it's like, she's a part of you.
Yeah. Right. I know. And that's like truly like one of the really frustrating things about all this is like you have to embrace, you can't really cast out any part of yourself, certainly not from your own sight. And like, which is a very biblical way I just said that, but anyway.
Well, particularly, I think like a lot of times too, and this is a slightly different, not a slightly different take, but along those same lines of like, who is the good wife character inside of you, is I think like often, you know, particularly when we realize we're becoming our parents in one way or another, people are like, you know, they'll try to make it not happen for as long as humanly possible through artificial or implausible means. It'll inevitably happen because obviously it's going to happen, and then they'll be like, well, it just happened. I guess that's just who I am and how I am, and like I'm going to like double down on being that, rather than. And Sarah, this speaks to a lot of the things we talked about in Amadeus the other day about striving for perfection versus striving for being well adjusted, rather than figuring out like who that person is that is inside of you and like negotiating and navigating your relationship with that, rather, you know, again, rather than being like, I cannot be this and that's going to be successful, but ultimately you're going to be it, you know, be like, well, who is this person? Who is the good wife? And what nourishment am I getting out of that, and also what, whatever the opposite of nourishment is coming out of our relationship.
Poop. Sorry, it had to be said.
It's perfect.
I also feel like, just to add to that, you can spend your life trying to avoid becoming your parents and then define yourself by trying to be the opposite of your parents, and it will amount to the same thing. And if you're me, it means you'll go so many years when you really should just have a Costco membership, but you don't have a Costco membership because you're afraid of becoming your parents. And I do think it's a meaningful step that now I do have a Costco membership, and I go to Costco all the time.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. The hot dogs.
Yeah.
They're paying
Because
you to go.
She becomes her father in a not expected way, which is she becomes a person who gaslights her. That's the way that it manifests and happens,
Jesus.
and that's what she inherits.
Wow.
And so, which is the curse of that sort of abuse.
Yes. Yeah, and also, and we get kind of, as the novel progresses, into how, like, Jesse, look at your life, look at your choices, look at your husband, for that matter. You married someone a lot like your dad, didn't you there?
Right.
And if you're, like, walking down the aisle towards someone and you're like, he's not like my dad. He's probably like your dad. You shouldn't even have to be thinking that.
And your dad was many people. Maybe one of those people that was in your dad is worth marrying. But there's a lot of versions of it that aren't.
I know. I'm totally leaving out of this the possibility that maybe you, like, liked your dad, and that would be a good thing. That's just insane to me. I mean, I know it happens, but it's statistically irrelevant. And that's not just bitterness talking.
Y'all should come and listen to our fun show about movies.
It's so fun. We never ever talk about trivia or behind the scenes shit. We don't care. People are like, when will you talk about the movie? And we're like, why don't you want to talk about my 7th grade humiliation? That's what it's really about when you think about it.
It's funny. I also love that we do get a bit of Good Dog Prince's POV in the book.
Yeah!
He does get humanized a bit. Like, we get, like, where he came from. Why is he here? What is he doing? And, him and
Who
Jesse.
is the bitch master?
What fuckhead set him loose in the woods?
It's like they're both just doing what they need to do to survive.
I was like, was Stephen King back on the cocaine when he wrote this one? Because I feel like writing dog POV is top tier cocaine behavior. Like, that is.
I think Needful Things was his
POV.
first sober book, and I'm trying to remember when that came out.
I love that you know that. That's great.
That's fantastic. That's
why you do what you do.
I do love the dog POV so much.
Mm-hmm.
I like that the movie, we talked about this before we all got on the call.
1991, so yeah, this must have been 92.
This is peak. Yeah, this was like, he read that dog POV and was like, I gotta do some stuff. No, I think it's great. I think it's great that it shows up. It's awesome. To Sarah's points earlier, it's like incredibly experimental for a horror writer to be doing this in like a very serious way, where this is presented.
Yeah.
Alongside everything else.
And you know what I feel like you're saying is, you're not saying horror writer, because you and I both know what actual horror writers are like, and they do weird shit all the time. You're saying, like, horror writer. This is the way Roger Ebert would say it.
Totally. Like a dismissive, like, that's what people sort of are making assumptions about.
Just writing the same pot boiler over and over. And it's like, have you ever read any of them?
It's incredible that he does that. So the difference between movie and book, in book, the dog dies in order to substantiate Jesse's made up story that makes it possible. I don't know. There's a reason, which is, I feel like that one. I don't know. I feel like the dog didn't have to die. That's fine. But in the movie, the dog doesn't die. But Jesse's imagination of herself tells her the thing that we should be gleaning from the book, which you both are in survival mode, and you should actually learn a thing or two from this dog.
Yeah.
Well, and also it's a dog who's like used to having a master and doesn't know how to survive without one.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking.
As is Jessie.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Really well said.
Just making sure your heart is being broken by at least two things.
Yeah. Someone mentioned, as I was looking up stuff the other day, and it's something I didn't even think about, but in the like very literary realm, that she is like in Jesus pose the whole time, and she does kind of wound her wrists and find like a resurrection of sorts.
She is.
And I'm like, didn't even think of that.
I have like a whole mental file. Here are some of my mental files. Monstera movies, horror movies with monsteras in them. There's a lot. And then B, horror movies where women end up with the wounds of Christ. Because like this one, Ready or Not, immediately comes to mind. I wish I could think of a third thing because that always sounds more impressive, but there's some stuff in that file.
Well, this one also has the thing that prompted me to ask a question about this on Twitter, which is the single outfit, like in Ready or Not or in Carrie, or sort of like a memorable outfit that has some degeneration that tracks with the progression of the character, which is another thing that
and that gets covered in blood, ideally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad she wasn't topless for the movie.
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, it's just like I don't want to look at Carla Gugino's breasts for a whole movie because it'll stop being special, and they deserve to be special. Like caviar.
Deserve to be savored.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I know Stephen King gets a lot of shit for a lot of stuff, but I mean, for having a topless character the whole book, she is not sexualized. Like, they are never really described.
Yeah, it's just mentioned once that it happens, which is fascinating. So that was one of my other favorite, and I totally understand that, like, in nearly any review online, almost 100% of the time, the democratization of reviews has just brought us people who need to work something out in therapy, working it out through having just engaged a text in one way or another. And so, you know, a lot of the negative review, or a handful of the negative reviews that I came across were like, had mentioned in passing that Jessie at the end of the book talks about losing all of the weight, and she's like, she's happy about this. She's like, she'd be fine if she just stayed at the weight that she was or whatever. And she's like, this is classic King, whatever. And it's like, did you not read the rest of the book that has like an incredibly dynamic illustration of a multi-layered person? But I get, you know, I get that people are working through some shit. And I get that Stephen King also just doesn't have a great track record in some of these arenas. One of the things that I was a little worried we were going to fall into the same place, but I think we see some King evolution, is King has, we talk about this in our Dead Zone episode, some real issues with moms, real issues with the monstrous mother. And in this case, we get what seems to be that, maybe, but then it's revealed that, like, you know, maybe that's like a slight bit of character, but it's not sort of over the top in the way that it is. And that dynamic is used in the father's manipulation of Jessie. So that was like a surprisingly, not layered, but like a surprisingly thoughtful pivot for the typical Stevie mother.
Yeah. Well, it's like Misery, but everything's scaled down, I feel like, in many ways. And like we have kind of the monstrous mother in Misery and also here, and just like whittled down to a more everyday, like endemic, you know, scale. And I think, like to me, there's plenty of stuff in Stephen King's writing of women that rings misogynistic for me, but I tend to like accept a lot of the monstrous mom stuff because I always appreciate like being shown women who are awful or who are, you know, complicit, and I don't like to use the word evil, but who do like really awful shit, where you see that like they're like that not because they're like kind of over the top like sexy noir villainesses, but because life chews up women just like it chews up men, and some women direct that poison outward rather than inward, as is the mandate.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. In it, you actually get an interesting balance where you have Bev's father and then Richie's mother, and it's just like
Mm-hmm.
all parents fuck up
Yeah.
their kids in some very interesting ways.
And then
Yeah.
you have who is the Mike who ends up running the librarian? Mike's dad, who's wonderful,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
that's our lone exception for almost every Stephen King book maybe ever written. So yeah,
Is Mike's dad the one who ultimately dies in the fire?
yeah.
Do
Or
both of his parents die? His whole family dies
Yes.
in that fire?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, because you know what they say: only the good dads die young.
Well, did we have any final thoughts we wanted to share?
I mean, I just really love this novel and this movie, and I loved having the chance to discuss it with you. And
Oh,
yeah, it's I remain it remains something that feels very meaningful to me, and I'm just happy that somebody bothered to write a novel like this that then also, like, through the accident of every previous thing the author had written being a bestseller pretty much managed, because like someone else could write this and it would be published by the University of Iowa Press and there would be like a 500 print run, right? That's what I
mm-hmm.
think. And I love that this like made it in such a big way into the world.
Yeah.
Cosign.
I love this book. It absolutely blew me away the first time I read it. Like I said, I went in with really low expectations because I'm like, how is this possibly gonna work? And then it resonated with me in ways that I did not expect, and that laid the groundwork to help me understand a lot of stuff later on. I had friends that came forward with sexual abuse against the man that used to be our youth pastor, and kind of seeing that they had a similar dynamic
Mm.
as this was, I mean, illuminating
Yeah.
and
Well,
awful.
to the point. I mean, my family worked for the Boston Archdiocese while it was Spotlight times, and
Wow.
just watching how, like, to your points about what you said about what expectations are about whether or not you can trust the heart or like a greater authority should be doing that for you. I mean, you're essentially um, creating the perfect conditions
Mm-hmm.
for abuse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Not accidentally, I would
No,
Right.
imagine.
not at
Right.
all. It's
Yeah.
so perfectly constructed
So it was
to keep
interesting
going.
hearing you say that earlier, because I mean this is something that's not just about what's going on in the home. This is about
Mhm.
how power structures work generally as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, a big power structure, there were so many sermons I sat through about the dangers of gossiping. And you know what? That is ultimately what led to it coming out, was someone saying, hey, I remember you being close with him. I remember you babysat for him. Did you have this experience as
Mhm.
well?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it being, yeah, I did.
And
Right.
how gossiping becomes a code word for women
Women sharing.
talking. I
Yeah.
wonder if that's like they talk about that in that movie that I haven't seen yet because it was only briefly in major franchise theaters in my city.
It's a Sarah
Yeah.
Polly one, Sarah.
There we go. I love her. I
Yeah,
love this.
the
I love
best.
Sarah Polly and Sarah Paulson. I hope they do a movie together someday.
They do a team up.
Paul McCartney. I would also this also makes me think to add I've researched and podcasted about the Satanic Panic a fair bit. I can't believe I guess use podcasted as a verb. I feel like I'm a millennial character on a Michael Patrick King show. But I have, and like one of the things that I come back to a lot about it is that like one of the many unfortunate consequences of the Satanic Panic was this kind of catering to the kind of instinctual belief on the part of a lot of Americans of like, sure, I remember my father abusing me, during the eclipse, but it wasn't violent and it wasn't that bad. And it's like, I can kind of rationalize it. So it has to be more. There has to be something for me to be this fucked up, something, you know, proportionally fucked up has to have happened to me, and this isn't enough. And that's where the Satanist becomes so valuable, because you then are like, yeah, your dad was under control of Satanists and he made you eat babies, which kind of actually comes up later in the serial killer plot in a way. But anyway,
Yeah.
and I love that this is a book that is kind of this time and is saying like, no, like whatever you've been through is enough. And like, you can spend your whole life rationalizing that other people have had it worse in terms of abuse or assault or just any kind of trauma. But like, ultimately that's just another way of avoiding looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will also say, so as to not end on such a grim note, that I was reading this last night, and it mentioned Jessie freaking out after Ruth tried to talk to her about the eclipse, and her like very quickly moving out and finding an apartment with like kind of normie girls who wear a lot of ship and shore blouses. And I was like, what's ship and shore? That feels like a thing I should know. And then I took off the sweater, and it's a ship and shore sweater.
Wow.
Which I didn't know. And I don't really wear it very often either. So, I like when stuff like that happens. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's just cool.
That is cool. We have a few traditions on this podcast, but one of them is to ask what you've been enjoying in horror lately. So do you have a chilling obsession?
Well, yesterday I went to the wonderful Hollywood Theater here in Portland, Oregon, and saw King Kong in 35 millimeter.
Ooh,
and yeah. King Kong is so much more fucked up and violent than I ever realized. It really puts the pre and pre-code. It's got like King Kong has to kill so many dinosaurs. I had no idea how much of that movie was spent killing dinosaurs and also being racist. It's like one of those movies where like what you think of as the movie is like the last 7 minutes of the movie. And I'm like,
yeah,
I'm excited to learn more about King Kong. I really want to know where all the other where does family go? Why is he alone on that island? That's my main question going forward.
Yeah, where did he come from?
Yeah.
I read, knowing that the movie Knock at the Cabin is coming out, I've read a lot of Paul Tremblay's books, but I never read the book that's based on, which is Cabin at the End of the World, I think. Mm-hmm. Much more logical title than Knock at the Cabin. And I would recommend it if you like reading horror books. I am very curious about what changes they're going to make to the movie in order to make Americans not refuse to watch it.
Mm-hmm. You just can't kill kids in movies anymore.
No, not like. Although the new Halloween
starts
has a phenomenal kid death, like a child
fantastic
dies in the new Halloween, and you're like, yeah, this is how we're starting.
I like how whenever we talk about horror, we're like, horror is not just for creeps and sickos. Ways for people to think about the world they live in, and also anxiety and depression. And then we say shit like that, and I'm like, it's fair for people to think we're sick.
Layered. There's a lot.
yeah. So there's a lot, and the book ends outside of even that ends in a way that is like incredibly thoughtful, in a way that I'm struggling to know how M. Night Shyamalan is gonna pull off. But I'm eager to see what happens.
Alex, I have to say, I don't think he's gonna.
I'm very worried. Paul Tremblay is one of my favorite authors. I love that book, and I know when I spoke to him a few months ago about his book, The Pallbearers Club, he did mention that
I love that book.
It was good, yeah. That there had been some changes, and if you think you know what's going to happen, you don't. So
I imagine that's the case. And then, totally. And then just my only other recommendation is I'm excited for, and this isn't a recommendation about anything I've engaged, but I know that you are also, we three are Stephen Graham Jones fans, and the sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw comes out this year, right? Yeah. And I'm excited for that.
Yeah. I think you might be doing a signing near me next month. So
nice.
Fantastic.
Go see it. I watched Megan the other day.
Ooh.
And I had so much fun. I went on a Saturday, and it was all like teen girls with their friends and their moms. I think I was the only like single 30-year-old in the theater. But it was so fun. Also another child death that I was kind of cheering on. I'm like, she was right.
Oh yeah.
Honestly though.
Totally.
Megan did nothing wrong. Yeah.
That kid was going to grow up to be Gerald.
Yeah.
I love that this is a movie that feels like it's catering to teen girls.
Yes.
Yeah, Sarah and I saw it in the theater. It was Sarah's second time. It was my first, and it was full of not boys, not boys of many stripes.
There
It
you
was
go,
great.
little robot girl bosses.
Yes.
There was like 2 teen boys, but yeah, it was so fun. I'm so glad Allison Williams has just like come on into like the horror genre. She is great. That child actress, I know she's been in a couple other things. I want to say she was also in Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House.
She was. I was just reading this.
Okay. Yeah.
Violet McGraw.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry. I don't want to get greedy with my things, but I do want to say I saw Skinamarink in the theater, and I think people should watch it. But maybe don't go in a theater where you will for sure be surrounded by people who are frustrated with the movie.
Oh,
It's coming to Shudder, I think,
Great.
in a few weeks. So.
Watch it. When you watch it, anyone who's going to watch it, put your fucking phone in another room.
Okay.
And just pay attention to the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it
not a
works
movie I have to
simmers.
look at.
It works because it's boring. It works because it's boring in parts.
Interesting.
And then when it's not boring, so like if you take yourself out of being bored with a second screen, you're gonna not have a good time.
Oh yeah, I mean, boredom is a crucial element of horror. Look at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
Totally. And this also makes the Blair Witch Project, which is itself kind of a boring movie, look like a Jerry Bruckheimer movie.
Well, I'm excited.
I know. I've heard people say it's experimental. I had someone in the group chat for our Patreon supporters say that they're like, it was a little too weird for me. I didn't like it, but I was definitely scared when I got home. Like, I definitely like.
That's a great one.
It sticks with you for sure.
Nice.
Yeah. You see it like kind of the way that you see the space cowboy in the book. You kind of see, when like you close your eyes and you have something burned in your eyes. That's how I felt after seeing the movie. You see pieces of it in your home after.
Is it at all like House of Leaves? It feels kind of House of Leaves-y based on the synopsis.
Sarah, that's a great comparison. Similar, yes, in some way structurally for sure.
Yeah, because House of Leaves is also like intentionally boring in a very exciting way.
Yeah, it's
totally great comparison.
Interesting. I'm very excited to check it out. I've been very excited about hearing all the buzz about it in the horror Twitter sphere.
We live in a great time to be horror.
Yeah,
we do.
We absolutely do.
Really
Honestly, when I started the podcast in like 2017, I had to really dig for like
different
horror topics and stuff. And now I'm like, I can barely keep up with everything coming out every year. I do not read everything that comes out.
And I would actually say maybe the best time ever for horror movies, because it's so like, even 10 years ago, I remember there were so many movies that I had to like order on VHS from eBay because no one, they weren't, available any other way. And now it just feels like there's so much obscure stuff that you can just like watch with like 3 clicks while you're lying on your couch.
Yeah, we have so much accessibility now. Well, another tradition we have on the podcast is to ask our guests what their final girl song would be. And we have a playlist where we keep everyone's answers.
So to clarify, is this like the song that plays as you're like, riding away in the pickup truck or whatever?
I've had people interpret it that way, or like the final confrontation, or like end credits, however you want to take it.
Okay.
I will go first. Can I go first, Sarah? Because I feel like yours is going to be more clever than mine.
No, I don't know. Yeah, but go.
Better rhythm.
We might have the same one, actually.
I don't think we do. I know we don't. We'll find out. That would be funny if we do that. My go-to karaoke song. I've sung 2 karaoke songs ever in my life, and one is "Ring of Fire," which is not my go-to final girl song, and the second is "The Misfits Where Eagles Dare," which the refrain is, "I ain't no goddamn son of a bitch. You better think about it, baby." And it just says that over and over. And I feel like as a driving away Sally Hardesty on the back of the pickup truck into the distance, it's a perfect song, and it has some presumed gender inversion, which is fun too.
Ooh, I do like that. That's good.
Well, I mean, I think about this practically daily, honestly, because like whenever I'm listening to music, I'm like, would this be a good end of a horror movie song? And my current thought is Whole Lot of Shaking Going On by the version by Little Richard, which is just like one of those like very arch sort of pop songs in this context, which to me kind of, I don't know, I just love that, the idea of that at the end of like specifically a movie where like you as the final girl have just had to kill a lot of people, and you're just like you're just kind of like feeling some euphoria. And it opens with the line "Come on over, baby," which I love because it's just like, whatever, just I'll come see if you can take me. Let's do it.
Love it.
I love that. Okay, I will be adding those two to the playlist and putting them on the Instagram story when this episode releases. I actually think this is going to be like the Valentine's week
Perfect.
that comes out. So
that's the most perfect thing.
It's a movie and a book about a romantic getaway.
Absolutely.
That's so true.
And oh my gosh, you guys need to do Dolores Claiborne. I am very excited to hear that. The audiobook.
Bring you on to do Dolores Claiborne, and then we can do sister episodes.
Absolutely. We'll see each other across the eclipse.
Aww.
I love that. I can't believe that. I'm so glad you brought that up. I love that when we first get the eclipse in the movie, it's starting from left to right, and at the very end of the movie, she's walking into the distance, and the shadow is exiting to the right. So like the movie takes place over the progression of the eclipse that's happening inside of her.
Ooh,
that's
art house shit. That.
Wow.
Love it.
Just hardcore. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on and talking to me about one of my favorites. I could not have picked two better people to bring on for this. So thank you.
Thank you. So this is so wonderful to get to talk about Gerald's game with you.
Perfect Sunday.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And where can people find you online?
They can find our show, You Are Good, on Twitter and Instagram at You Are Good Pod. And you can find Sarah's show on Twitter and Instagram, which is called You're Wrong About. I think You're Wrong About Pod.
I think it's You're Wrong About Pod on Instagram.
That's right.
Maybe.
And then You're Wrong About
on
Twitter.
And then, famously, you can find the podcasts themselves wherever you get your podcast. I have a long-term fantasy of starting a podcast platform called Wherever, because then retroactively every podcast will have been doing advertising for you without realizing. Nobody take my idea. It's my idea.
Okay. Virtual trademark. Your stamps on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at Books Freezer Pod, on Instagram at Books in the Freezer, on TikTok at Books in the Freezer, or you can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. If you would like to show your support for the podcast, there are a few ways to do that. And one of them is to become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. There's a $1, $3, and a $5 level with all kinds of perks at each level, going from early episode releases, group chats, movie nights, and stuff like that. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check that out at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. Another way to support the podcast is to use affiliate links. Those will be listed on the show notes for this episode, as well as books that were mentioned throughout this episode. So you can go on there, links to places like Amazon, Libro FM, and Fangoria. And if you're looking for a way to show your support without spending money, there are definitely ways to do that. Posting about the podcast, word of mouth, all of that is very huge, very important for small indie podcasts like this one. Also, taking time to leave reviews on podcast sites like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And I have a new Apple Podcast review. 5 stars from Sakura-chan67. Love the vibe. Great podcast. And the reason my hold list in Libby is so full. Sweating, smiling emoji. As a reader with limited time, I appreciate the time and attention given to the reviews and also love the author interviews. Well done. Thank you so much for that review, and thank you to all of you who have taken time to leave a few kind words about the show. I mean, I appreciate it because, of course, I love reading nice things about the show, obviously, but it's also really helpful for growth in the show. And I don't know, I don't understand the algorithm. It is like a fickle old god, but I know that if you feed it reviews, you will be rewarded by getting the show in front of more people, or so I've been told. So thank you to all of you. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_Ganya. That's LADY_GHENON. And on Instagram at That's What She Read. And that is That's with 2 A's. So thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.